All right. Oh, sorry. Okay. Maybe we'll start.
Everyone can hear me? Perfect. Is it good? Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you, Kelly.
Please join me in welcoming our faculty candidate for the RISE AI, hiring Jad Atwa. Jad is a PhD candidate in the Department of Systems and Information Engineering at University of Virginia. He was a research scientist intern at Amazon in the workforce planning science team. His research focuses on cognitive engineering and human-machine interaction with an emphasis on understanding the attributes, requirements, and design guidelines for effective human-machine teams operating in complex systems. Jad's research adopts eye tracking and socio-technical systems perspective to evaluate team dynamics with emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence, shifting the paradigm from single-user interactions to team-based collaborations. By identifying potential risks and mitigating harmful outcomes, Jad advances human-centered design principles and enhances machine intelligence to support safe, effective, and ethical team operations. So thank you all for being here, and Jad, the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, Ranjana. So hi, everyone. My name is Jad. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Systems and Information Engineering at the University of Virginia. And I'm very, very, very excited to be here to talk to you today a little bit more about my world of cognitive engineering, of the intersection with eye tracking and definitely teams in complex domains or complex systems. So let's just start there. What are those dynamic or complex domains? Those are usually systems or environments that are characterized by frequent and rapid changes. They're also characterized by high volume of data available, and this makes it very hard and requiring a lot of effective coordination between not just one person. It's usually multiple people working together to accomplish these goals. And this is why adding teams to this inherently complex system makes it even harder, and it kind of adds the complexity of team research, but also complex system research as well. So as you all know, industrial engineering or systems engineering is really all about optimizing complex systems. So all those systems that we have are really a combination of humans and machines and materials and even new technology that are working together to optimize this system and to make sure that we have safe operations with maximum performance. And in almost all complex systems, we still have to this day somewhere a human operator has to be involved with the system. And it's usually more than one human operator working together. And to make sure that this system is efficient, to make sure that this system is optimal, we want to make sure that the interaction between the humans and the system is also efficient and is also optimal. And it's important to make sure that the interaction between the humans together and together with the display or the new technology is also optimal. And there's new technology going in that teams-based complex systems every day, including whether it's eye tracking-based displays or whether it is actually AI, regardless what it is, even greater automation. Things have been growing so fast within teams without really clear understanding of whether this is enough, whether this is needed, and whether this is actually trusted. So there's complex systems, and there's teams with them, and now we're adding new technology, and now we're adding new AI. But we've been seeing AI being integrated into complex systems all the time, where it's actually teams working together. Now, most of the research is actually on one person interacting with AI. But let's say that currently that we've been seeing, AI is no longer just a tool. We've been seeing it as a collaborator. We've been seeing them as simulating human intelligence with using AI to make sure that AI can actually perceive and adapt some of the needs. But really, it's becoming more as a collaborator, and it's becoming more able to have decisions and able to actually adjust and learn, more importantly. So how do we make sure that this addition of AI actually enhances this system that we barely understand yet? We don't even have full understanding of human-human teams in those complex systems to add those greater automation and AI. And want to make sure that what we add is actually added benefit rather than associated costs with it. So this is why when I started my PhD, I was so excited about AI and this technology, but I had to pause and think for a second and be like, AI cannot reach its full potential if we don't have a full understanding of human-human teams first. Human-human teams, or even multiple humans within one team, it's very complex that we haven't reached the potential yet. That was back in 2021. We are there now as a sneak peek, but back in the day, we didn't really know what was going on with human-human teams, and we had to understand that fully before diving into AI. So this is why I'm going to be talking to you today about some of my studies that I've been done with human-human teams, with all the understanding is that we want to make sure we know human-human teams before we add more stuff to it. So right now, even if it's a one-person system, which is very rare to find, even if it's just one person doing the task, if it's a one-person system, the second you add AI to it, this is a team. And if you don't have an understanding of human-human teams, or you don't have understanding of teams research, how you're going to optimize collaboration between humans and AI if you don't know how to optimize human-human teams first. And once we can do that, we can keep adding AI to teams of 2 or even more, and we can have even multiple AI teammates working with multiple human teammates. But it all goes back to this. Whether AI is an individual or is it actually a team, those principles of human teamwork are very fundamental to create those optimal collaborative systems, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure everything that we add actually fits into the needs of the human and not vice versa. So this is why everything, as I mentioned, starts to sparkle, is that we need to understand human-human teams. That's why we conducted this whole review at the beginning of my dissertation, to understand what factors actually affect human teamwork. We have to understand that before we move on to adding new technology. And it's pretty basic, but we want to make sure that, like collaboration, tasks require proper communication between teammates, and that requires mostly a continuous attention and a set strategy between teammates. And even when we have human-human teams, we are still having a lot of accidents and a lot of incidents. For example, if one example is an unmanned aerial vehicle actually crashing into the ground, with the accidents basically later attributed to causes of inadequate coordination between teams. So it shows that up to this day, we still really don't know how to prevent some of those accidents. We've come so far, but we still need to understand human-human teams to add AI to it. So one of the things that we found in this review is that to actually quantify human teamwork, we need real-time metrics to do that. So we are always in continuous search for unobtrusive real-time methods to basically do not interfere with the workflow. We can get information about human teams without having to stop and ask them, without having to actually interrupt them. And this is where eye tracking comes into the floor. And it's a very powerful technology that we have been using for a while now to actually try to understand and quantify teamwork and to get insights about human-human teams and their interaction with what we have currently with automation, but with eye tracking. And it's really a technology, as the name says, it tracks your eyes as you do different tasks. And that gives you a state of the eye movements and positions, but also how they respond to visual stimuli as they do different tasks. And today I'm going to give you a very, very small background on eye tracking and how it led to the study. Again, I've done multiple studies. I was choosing which one to present to you today, but I figured this could be one of the nice studies. But I'm going to give you a bit of background on eye tracking, hopefully to spark some interest among you guys. I think Shakespeare summed up eye tracking best when he said that the eyes are the window to your soul. And he probably didn't know exactly what he was talking about back then, but if I know what a person is seeing, then I know basically I have a lot of very valuable, very powerful information that I can use if I know what this person is looking at. And if I know what your eyes are seeing, then hopefully I will be able to understand what you're thinking about, what you're looking at, how you're feeling, and what are you experiencing between you and the outside world. And you can always say, Jad, that's probably not true, and I've been enough classes, and I've taught enough classes to know that every time I'm lecturing and people are looking at me, that's not always the case, that everyone is really thinking about what I'm talking about. But in most intents and purposes, this does hold true. In the real world, whatever you're looking at is whatever you're actually focusing on and acquiring information. And in more technical terms, this is referred to as the eye-mind hypothesis, meaning that there's this link between what's on your mind and what you're looking at. And this is very mostly true in one person, but then when you put two teams together, when you put two people in a team together or multiple people, how the eyes-minds hypothesis even still get into place. So let's say you're scanning this news. I'm Lebanese, and we're still very happy and proud that Miss Lebanon was, first runner-up Miss World, but let's say you're scanning this news, and really the eye tracking gives you when you're scanning this simple news is that this technology, it gives you an impression of what a person is looking at. And it's really a bunch of what's going on behind the scenes is those circles and lines. And the circles are basically where you are fixating. Those are fixations means where you are acquiring information. This is where usually visual information take place. And those fixations are relative in size. They could be small, they could be big, relative to how much duration you are spending on. So for example, here I might be spending too much versus here I might be spending just a bit of time. But still, I was acquiring some kind of information from there. And in between those fixations are usually what we call saccades or saccades. This is where you're scanning. This is where you're doing different things. And this is where there are very jerky, rapid eye movements where there's no visual information taking place. But our mind is so beautiful that everything that we view in the real world is really a mixture of those, more or less. It's a mixture of fixation and saccades. You look at something, you transition, you look at something else, you move, you look at something else. And this is all happening in milliseconds, and our mind is really, really beautiful doing that. But when we were thinking about what we can do with teams is that when people interact with each other, each teammate is going to have their own path that they're taking as they're scanning, which what we call scan paths. And many, many, many eye tracking metrics have been developed to tell us more about the cognitive capability of a person. So again, I can't really talk about all the studies that I've conducted, but I'm going to tell you how some of the stuff I did led to where I am within this study. But I've been thinking about if I'm scanning something and I'm doing a task with my teammate, this could be in red, the path I'm taking as I'm scanning. And this could be the path in green where my teammate is taking as they are scanning. Maybe I can develop some kind of metrics from those scan path comparisons of teams. And maybe I would know what constitutes a good scanning strategy versus a bad scanning strategy. Do we have to overlap so much like here? Or do we have to scan different areas like they're happening most of the time? What is a good scanning strategy? And we were able to develop really, really real-time, this is mostly real-time metrics, about eye tracking in teams, and we can know when a person and a team are going to break down in the future just by how they're scanning. I know this team is going to be a good team. I know this team is going to do well based on how well they're scanning, and I would know that they're going to break down in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, based on the way they're maybe overlapping in their eye gaze, scanning different ways. And there's some of these studies here. Again, I can't dive into so much of them, but I'll be more than happy if you have any questions about scan path comparison. I'll be more than happy to take some questions after. But the whole premise of this slide leads us to some of the sparks that I've been doing is that sometimes people overlap in their eye gaze when there's other critical areas happening in that mission. So what if I show each teammate where their partner is looking at? What if I show them where their teammate is? Is that going to help? Is that not going to help? Is it an added workload in an already oversaturated system visually? This is where gaze sharing started to pop up, meaning that if my teammate and I are working on tasks on our own screens, it's like a shared screen. If this is my screen over here, what if I can show where my teammate is looking at on my screen, and I can show my teammate where my eyes are on his screen using different ways we can do this? Is that going to help? Is that not going to help? And the way we can do it is, for example, using a dot, just where the fixation is, for example. Or what if we, for example, do a trail of not just where my partner's gaze is, but also which areas they're coming from, what areas they're scanning as they're going. Is this going to help? According to theory, visual over visual, not a good idea. But again, there might be some other information being given that could outweigh its benefits. What's the good guideline for such a new technology? And people are starting to use it without any type of guidelines. All of this to give us a better understanding of how this new technology operates in human teams to be able to use it in human AI teams in the future. So we started to see this method to be relatively helpful, not so much maybe sometimes, how we're going to do this in mostly simple task-specific domains, like, for example, assembling puzzles or looking for letters among letters with my teammate. But even in those small tasks, we're able to understand the process of collaborative reference, and we're able to hopefully improve the physical task at hand. But even though we saw this was helpful for simple tasks, even remote tasks, we saw also in the literature that sometimes it might induce some attentional costs that could actually outweigh its benefits. And again, as more elements are being incorporated into the system, having this intelligent technology or having this system working with 2 people already, what are some guidelines? We can't just create this technology and put it in the system hoping it's going to work. We need to make sure that we understand, as new elements are being integrated, like AI and other things like greater automation, what works and what doesn't in those systems. So this is why we want to assess team performance and other metrics like workload and how aware they are when they interact with the technology. So this is why we recruited 70 participants. We divided them into 35 teams of 2. And we used the UAV simulation testbed that we developed in our lab. It's basically similar to the one that the Air Force uses to monitor multiple UAVs. A UAV is, a plane, like a drone, basically flying around. It's unmanned, which means it doesn't have a human inside of it. It's usually monitored by a person behind the scenes, monitoring multiple drones flying around. They want to make sure that it's, flying in safe airspace. So we had 2 monitors here. So this is how teammates sat. We have them sitting next to each other. They were doing the simulation over here. And basically, those 2 monitors are networked, which means that it's one game split into 2 screens, basically. Or basically, it's one game with like 2 mice. So it's the shared display, shared task on 2 displays, basically. So if you click something on the left, it's going to appear on the right. And if you click something on the left, it's going to be on the right, on the left. So it's basically both are together tackling those tasks. And we have those 2 full-view eye trackers over here, and they are basically monitoring people's eyes as they do these tasks. So they're eye trackers over here. So let's talk a little bit about the tasks. Again, this is a complex system, so there's a lot of tasks happening at the same time. And we're going to talk a bit about the tasks in depth, but basically, you have here to detect targets. That's the first task. We're going to talk about what that means. But also, you have to fix leaks, you have to reply to messages, and also you have to make sure that planes aren't flying in unsafe airspace. All of those things are happening at the same time, and people are doing it right now, and even people are still thinking about integrating AI in those complex systems, and we have to understand what that means. What are we integrating AI to be able to integrate it effectively? Because there's already some complexity there. So let's say first within the target detection. That basically means that teams are going to be working together to detect targets. So you can see here, there's 16 UAVs flying around, and those are the views from the 16 UAVs. And you can see, for example, here it's what a target looks like. It's this purple target, for example. When you see it, you want to click this target detection button. And it could be around, for example, here there's another one. So some UAVs on, and some of them are off. That's how we control workload in other studies, but it's kind of consistent for this study. But the whole premise is you have to detect targets. That's the primary task. We also have 3 secondary tasks. First, they need to reroute planes away from no-fly zones, which means that each plane has its own line. It means where it's headed in the future. And if this line is going into a no-fly zone, you want to make sure that you reroute this plane away from the no-fly zone before it hits that there. And if it does, your plane and UAV is basically lost, and you don't want that. So how you do it is that, for example, let's see here, Juliet is headed into a no-fly zone. We can see it right here. And the way you do it is that you click on Juliet from the panel here, and you will be given with 3 alternative routes. And whichever route is away from the no-fly zone, you confirm it. You click the confirm button, and then the UAV will hover away from the no-fly zone. So you have to do that in time, because if you don't, the UAV will be lost. The second secondary task is fixing leaks. Sometimes UAVs leak fuel, and that has caused a lot of accidents in the past, but it's not as complex as rerouting. Because when there's a leak, you can see here, fix leak button, you can click it, and that's how the leak is going to be fixed. But also there's a time constraint there, because if you don't fix the leak in time, you're going to be facing a fatal fuel leak condition, which means that there's no going back. And then the fuel will be lost very, very quickly, and then you're going to be losing that UAV. Finally, you have to reply to chat messages from the headquarters, and you'll be given a question here, and you'll be given multiple answers for multiple choice questions. Again, all of those tasks, we're trying to publish the simulator. That's why it's currently under review. But all those tasks are happening at the same time, okay? So it's a very complex system. There's a lot of things happening, and we're going to see a video of about 30 seconds, and you can see how much things are changing as you do these tasks: target detection, rerouting, leaks, and messages. So you can see here, for example, there's a leak that they're fixing now. We can see there's a target here that they just detected, and there's a couple targets here that they missed. Juliet is heading to a no-fly zone here. I think, yep, they're going to reroute it. You can see it's rerouted away. There's a target here. There's a target there. There's a couple targets they missed. We can see Papa's headed to a no-fly zone over here. And it goes right into the no-fly zone, and it's lost. So this is the experiment. Like, each condition was like 15 minutes, and that's only like 20-something seconds. So there's a lot of things happening. That's how dynamic these systems are. Now, how did we use this intelligent technology to understand how people use it is that obviously we have this eye tracking. So we collected the eye tracking data and we projected it on the partner screen in real time. And we used the dot and the trail. So we want to understand if we give them just an impression of where their teammate is, but also an impression of not just where they are, but where they're coming from and the scan they're taking, if that's going to help them or not. So again, if this is my screen, those are my partner's gaze. So we had one independent variable, which is this visualization technique, but we had 3 levels, which is no gaze, sharing, dot, and trail. And then we want to assess their performance across all of the point systems, so how well they were doing across all tasks. If they lose UAVs, they lose points. If they get UAVs, if they do something wrong, they do something right. But also we're assessing each task for the accuracy of each task. Also we had workload. We used the NASA TLX questionnaire to assess workload. Also situation awareness. And if you're not familiar with what situation awareness is, it's basically just how aware you are of what happened in the past, what's happening now, and what's going to happen in the future. But it's also, we can take more questions about that at the end, but if you're interested, we used something called SAGIT, which is the Situation Awareness Global Assessment Technique to assess. But that means we give them questionnaires about their awareness and they would fill as they were doing the tasks. And obviously, we were also assessing the eye tracking metrics. So the fixation and secase I just talked about, we want to understand, how many times you were fixating, how long you were fixating in each condition, how well you were scanning. Maybe you don't need to scan as much with the trail and the dot versus others. So we want to put all of these things in one study to have a comprehensive overview of what this technology means for human-human teams. So they're trained for like 15 minutes, and usually they have to achieve a high level of accuracy to be able to participate at the end. And SAGIT usually requires you to freeze the simulation to assess situation awareness. So at random times, we would freeze the session. We would tell them, pause. And they would pause here, and we would give them SAGIT questionnaires to fill to assess how aware they are as a team. And there's a lot of literature on you can pause for like 2 minutes and stuff. It didn't take that long. That wouldn't affect subsequent performance. But yeah, each condition was 15 minutes. And we obviously had a within subject design. So each team did the 3 conditions counterbalanced. But what we had was basically 15 minutes. So we had 3 SAGIT freezes. We used a random number generator to see when we're going to freeze. So what happened was they started the condition, whether it's dot, trail, or nothing. First freeze would come in. They would pause, fill out the SAGIT questionnaire. It's going to freeze again. They're going to fill out another SAGIT questionnaire. They're going to continue until the third. And this is an example of what those questionnaires would look like. It's usually like a 13-question query, but it's a question about what's happening when we froze and what's going to happen in the future if we didn't do some things. But at the end of each condition, we had to assess workload, and we repeated this 3 times for the 3 conditions. And they also had to answer some debriefing questionnaires at the end. But what did we really see and how is that going to shape our future work is that basically, we're not going to dive into all the statistical analysis, but I'm more than happy to take any questions, but if you're interested in all the MANOVAs and ANOVAs. But what we saw was that the performance and the awareness had the similar trajectory. The trail was the highest, and the dot was the lowest, and the no-gaze sharing fell somewhere in between. And that was a bit surprising, at least for me, because I expected those 2 techniques to behave maybe in the same way, if they're going to do well or not. But the trail was the best, and the dot was actually the worst. And when it comes to performance and awareness. When we go to workload, again, we're not going to really dive in too much into the graph, but what we saw was, it was a bit interesting. The trail was the best, but the dot was not the worst in the workload here. And we want to understand, why was the dot not the worst? So if the dot was not the worst in workload, why did it give us bad results as well? But still, the trail was really the best when it comes to workload. It lowered workload the maximum way. And when it comes to the eye tracking metrics, really the only significant stuff that we saw was stuff related to scanning. So this technique gives us more insight about how people are scanning. And we realized that using the trail, people were scanning in the lowest way possible. They were scanning slower, they were scanning less. And we want to complement those quantitative results from the performance, awareness, workload, and eye tracking, all of those together to say why this was happening. And this is where qualitative analysis come into place as we complement some of the quantitative work. But some of the things that started to come up, mostly about functionality. Some people talked about the shape and the color, but mostly people were talking about the functionality. That's how we gained some insights about, okay, both techniques were helpful, but I was able to see more from the trail because it doesn't just show me where my partner is, but it shows me where they're coming from and the tasks they're taking, and that helped me a lot in terms of knowing where should I look and where should I look not. So I spent a lot of time trying to understand why was the trail most successful and why did the dot fail, and they're the same technology. Why are we seeing different results? And that's the beauty of teams, because you can't just create something and just throw it in the system, making sure that it's going to work. The way you do it is important. What we saw was knowing the context of your partner's scan, knowing where they are and where they're coming from. There's two different things. So first, knowing where they are, section A, helps you scan more efficiently. Okay, my partner is not here, and my partner is here. Okay, my partner is here, I can look somewhere else. That makes you scan slower. And that means you don't have to worry about other parts of the display, at least for a couple of seconds, and that made them lower workload. And this is what we saw with the dot, right? Because the dot gives you this context of where they are. However, the dot doesn't give you a context of where they're coming from, which is section B. And that's where they're coming from and where they are gives you more awareness of the entire task and what's going to happen, at least in a couple of seconds. And according to literature, obviously, lower workload and improved SA both are going to help you with performance. So what we saw is that the trail excelled in both. And we saw that section A, the dot had it, lower workload. But now we have a better understanding of why the dot failed. Although it lowered workload, because you were able to see where they are, we weren't able to see where they're coming from. And this is where the dot fell short in achieving part B. And then it couldn't help with SA, so basically it didn't help with performance if you need both. So what does this really tell us? It tells us that only when done right, integrating technology into human-human teams helps. You have to assess it from a human factors perspective. You have to assess it from a cognitive engineering perspective. What lowers their workload? How does it lower their workload? Even if it lowers their workload, were they still aware of doing some stuff? How are they performing? And what do they need out of this new technology? So this kind of puts some of the debate to rest that gaze sharing could be a valuable mechanism in those complex systems, but the success hinges on very careful integration of new intelligent technologies into those complex systems. And obviously, this gives us a sense of whether it's going to be something with AI or something that's going to be just with eye tracking displays. It gives you a bit of a sense of how important it is to not just create a technology and throw it in. Because if we did that with the dot, that would have been failed. So we need to understand some of the guidelines for that. So I'm going to talk to you again, I'll be more than happy to take any questions, but there's more elements to technology than just assessing it with teams, but also you have to assess its socio-technical dimensions. So within complex systems, for example, communication is very important. And with gaze sharing being another form of communication, should people still talk with each other? Should they not talk with each other? Is it a complement to verbal communication? Is it a replacement? And some of the answers we found, it depends. In tasks like the target detection, people didn't even talk when they were allowed to. And in tasks like the messages, no, they still needed to talk. Another aspect of this socio-technical analysis is interruptions. Teammates are interrupted a lot in those complex systems, and we want to make sure that any technology we integrate basically helps re-engage teams in the task as fast, and we saw that really helps. So just a glimpse of this study, we had the regular 2 displays already here, but we added 2 interrupting screens for each teammate, and we tried to understand how does gaze sharing help teammates re-engage in the task after an interruption. And we also used this on-off button because we still saw that the technology might be a bit distracting to some people. What if we give them the option to control it, keep it on or keep it off, or turn it on and off? You can see here it says stop gaze sharing. So that gives them also the option, and we're trying to assess what gives a best design for teams in terms of what do they need. And this was fascinating with the superior of gaze sharing with interruptions. It helped them re-engage very, very, very quickly. But I'll be more than happy to take any questions. So for my future work, now that we have some great understanding of everything that's going on, we have teams in the age of new technologies. Not just gaze sharing as an intelligent system, but also we have many, many more things to look into. So my studies before have showed us that there is a need to assess not just how the technology is, but how teams interact with it is very, very, very important to make sure we develop guidelines to when intelligent systems like gaze sharing fails or succeeds. But also, I've been doing a lot of projects on a lot of work as well on exoskeletons, for example, in healthcare. Again, I'll be more than happy to take any questions about that too. But we've been seeing that it's not just about creating these exoskeletons for healthcare and just putting it in the system. No, it's really all about how people are going to interact with it. Nurses with other nurses, nurses with physicians, with patients. What's that going to look like? It's very, very important. Even my experience at Amazon, when I worked for Amazon for some of those things, we found out that many people are so brilliant developing all those advanced models, but they still needed a research scientist who has human factors perspective to come in to assess those models and how people interact with it. So it wasn't just about creating those advanced models, which were great, but we still need to see when you put them in the robotic floors, when you put AI in robotic floors, how do people work together to pick and pack our packages are going to integrate with it. So all those give you one thing. Creating technology isn't enough. You have to have the socio-technical analysis of it to ensure a lot of safe and ethical operations. So now we're at the age of AI as a new technology and other intelligence system, whether you want to call that AI or not, but also AGI. Things are growing so fast that people are even looking at not just AI right now, but also AGI, or artificial general intelligence. Those are systems that mimic cognitive abilities to a point where they may even limit human intervention. They can be basically your teammate. They can not just be assistive devices anymore, but they can be your teammate. So AI already grew without really strong regulations, and AGI is growing as well as a field. And if anything that we've done before, it shows that we need to have some guidelines for that before we integrate it into those complex systems where human error is fatal. So teams in the age of AI and AGI, my overarching goal of my future research program would be to identify some of the design guidelines that could facilitate some of the human-AI teaming, or really human-human AGI teaming, basically to make sure that whatever this AI, in whatever form it is integrated successfully into those human systems. So my future research is going to take two different directions. We're going to look at AI as part of your display, which has been currently being right now, which is assistive AI. So for example, all those metrics that I've developed understanding human-human teams, eye tracking metrics that can predict when teammates are going to break down in the future, we can have all those as inputs to AI models. So the scan path comparisons that we talked about at the beginning, all of those tell you the cognitive state. And I can put it into an AI model, and that can tell the teams when they're going to break and when they're going to not break in terms of performance. The other part is actually AGI as a collaborative teammate. It's not anymore something that's going to be assisting us, adapting our systems and our tasks, but it could be an actual teammate. For example, I don't know if you guys have seen Tesla's Optimus bartending or blowing your mon or whatever, but hopefully we don't have them doing complex tasks just yet without us to understand what's needed from them. So let's talk a bit about the first part. So we want to use AI to integrate eye tracking and other stuff going on, like neuroergonomics, for example, in the department. We can have adaptive systems that integrate all those inputs that we've developed over the years, real-time metrics that can tell you when people are going to fail and maybe adapt them, adapt their task, adapt the workload. We know that they're under workload, do something about it. So how is that going to look like? What's going to look like if we're going to intervene? And this is where we want to develop guidelines to make sure that when people commit mistakes or errors, they're not doing it on purpose. We want to make sure if they're doing it in the right way or in the wrong way, and how the misuse and over-reliance can fall into place. But really more importantly, when we have this assistive AI, how are we going to provide some explanations for the people to make sure that they trust it? How are we going to explain that? How are we going to convince people that, hey, I know from your scanning as a team you're going to fail in like 10 minutes. How can we convince them? And how does that shape within low workload and high workload? So the goal is to make sure that we have assistive AI that's integrated seamlessly into those complex systems, especially teams in complex systems. And then as I mentioned, the second part is having AGI as a collaborative teammate, literally having an AI bot working with you. There's a lot of work that needs to be started right now in terms of that. Before it starts growing faster, we need to start to understand what do people need from it. Like, can AI serve as team leaders? Can they be a collaborative teammate? When you have different things that we've been understanding for years, which is the team dynamics. Now we have a complete understanding of it. How is it going to shift when we have an AI teammate? For example, what if we have conflict? Do AI as a bot has an opinion or doesn't have an opinion, and how it's going to resolve in that way? Those things are very important to ask before we actually put an AI teammate into a complex system, because conflict is going to rise. So what factors are going to influence our trust and decision-making with human AI teammates? And again, the goal is to develop all those frameworks to be able to foster some effective human AI teamwork. So for the last couple slides, in terms of domains, we can keep working on our UAV monitoring domains. Obviously, it's very important. But also, there's a lot of great work happening within the department, but outside the department, whether it's driving, whether it's aviation work. We can also keep looking at exoskeletons in healthcare and how we can have some more help with integrating this technology in healthcare when integrate teams. Also, what if an AI bot can be an air traffic controller, for example? It's crazy to think about it, but it might happen. But also, what if we have assistive AI in aviation? But again, I don't know if you guys are aware, but currently we have this RISE AI cluster hire happening. So that gives it very possible to work with other departments, other domains, who are interested in developing those models. They can use my inputs and they can develop some of those models, and we can actually work with them to implement it and to see what is needed and what it's not, whether that is computer science, whether that is psychology, and even if some of the work that's been carried out in our department. This might not be of interest of most of you guys, but some of the courses that are offered that I'll be happy to teach, there's obviously some human factors things. Basically, the accident causation class, I love that class. I've taught it a lot at UVA. But also, obviously, some of the new things happening like AI for people, human AI teaming, all of those. And my background in industrial engineering, but also my graduate school in systems engineering gives me flexibility to teach really multiple courses. But one thing that I do think it's missing in academia these days is eye tracking course. Graduate students need to learn about the powerful tool of eye tracking and what can it do for like eye tracking in individuals already, but also in teams, and how we can use it if we're going to use it in research. So obviously, there's funding sources. Obviously, the career award would be the go-to first. But also, we can look at the CISE, but also in the IS, even with the CHS under that. This is gibberish for most of you guys, but there's a lot of calls that are looking into this, and not many people are looking for implementation about AI. Everyone is obsessed with creating models, but more and more agencies are really looking at the powerful tool of human factors as well. When it comes to we're going to keep working on defense stuff for sure. We're going to have DARPA, the Young Faculty Award, to support some of the AI implementations in those technologies. We're going to do in healthcare. But really important, we can also leverage some of those partnerships that I developed with industry partners they really loved seeing the potential of human factors rather than AI. So like Amazon, like Google, who are looking into integrating AI in pair programming even as teammates. So we're going to develop frameworks for adaptive AI and assistive AI in systems. What is that going to look like? The explainability of it. We're going to have AI and AGI systems, role as teammates, collaborators, even team leaders. What is that going to look like? Novel methods to assess both of them in terms of misuse and failure modes. And on a broader impact, it's really safety, accountability, and effective decision-making to hopefully promote some of the human-centered design principles to make sure that those systems are integrated effectively to fit the user needs and not really vice versa. If there's anything you want to take from this talk, is that we want to design technology for human-human teams to fit the needs of the human-human team and not vice versa. So some of my references, and obviously I want to thank the Department of Industrial and Systems Engineering for having me today. And John, thank you as well for hosting. And I want to thank UVA and my advisors, Sarah Riggs, and some of my coworkers and co-authors and lab members, and obviously NSF for funding my work. And thank you for listening. I'll be happy to take any questions. Yes, Dr. Ardo.
Thank you very much for that presentation. There's some interesting things that you brought up. I'm just wondering, I have actually two questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
You're measuring the eye tracking. Have you considered using those signals that you're measuring from the eyes to not only inform the teammate, but to inform an intelligent improve their ability to make decisions?
Yeah, so this is currently part of what we're going to do as a future to integrate AI in the system, because right now we developed all those models and those metrics to know when a team is going to break down in the future, but we haven't really started integrating them in assistive AI. That's what the first part of my future work was going to be. But still, we did solicit some feedback to try to give them the on-off button, for example, to give them time to user control this. And that's the way to start, but still we need to adapt the task without them intervening.
So my second question is that is it got to do with eye tracking as well? And,
Yeah.
This works really well on a screen, but I'm a physical guy,
Mhm.
and I think about the world outside of the screen. And so what's your perspective on using this eye tracking for tasks that are in the physical world,
Yeah.
rather than looking at a screen? And I just think about some of my early days when I was working on trying to control wheelchairs. We thought about eye tracking as a potential method, but it doesn't work well because as soon as the person looks somewhere else, the wheelchair is going in
Yeah.
the direction. So what's your
So now we have a lot of options with eye tracking. There's options in terms of accuracy, there's options in terms of cost, but most importantly, there's options in terms of functionality. You can have head-mounted eye trackers that you can wear that can track your eyes as you are moving and as you are integrating in the real world. But also you can have AR as well. We use in the lab a lot of AR as well to integrate, to measure your eyes as you're doing some AR tasks. But more importantly, what I want to look at for some of my future students hopefully is VR. And you can integrate eye tracking in VR as well to track your eyes in VR. We have those headsets already to actually be able to, if we're going to have an AGI teammate, for example, like an Optimus, Tesla's Optimus, working with us, rather than putting them in a complex system and have mistakes, we can have them do it in VR, for example. And they can.
I don't want to dominate the questions, but isn't that you've got now not two-dimensional movement, but you're looking all around.
Yep.
And when people navigate themselves through, free space, they're looking at a lot of things.
Mhm.
The saccadic motions of the eyes. So how do you know that what they're looking at is really a signal and that they're just not looking at something that distracted them, or
Yeah.
it's an output rather than an input?
So we had a lot of obviously, it's not as easy to get those eye tracking. There's going to be raw data, and you don't get those fixation and saccades right away. You get them. You have a lot of models behind them. Are you detecting them based on velocity or where they are looking as teammates? But those are already very developed for 2D, and some people are also been developing, we do 3D in our lab as well, and we've developed some metrics for 3D. And we can get fixation and saccades in 3D as well from some of the algorithms we've developed. Yes?
Hey, Jad, great talk. I've got two
Yeah.
questions.
I'll also be sticking around if you guys have more questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So one kind of follows up from what Rob was asking, because you're looking at this eye tracking stuff and looking at the metrics for teaming, but I'm wondering, the way that AI models ingest screen data, you don't have eyes to track. So what are we thinking, or what are you thinking, I guess, for in the intermediate future about this kind of teaming thing and how these metrics are going to translate?
Great question.
Forward. Yeah.
So first of all, when it comes to the assistive AI, which is the first part of it, as AI as part of a display to monitor you and help you and learn from what you're doing to try to adjust your tasks, you don't really need to track their eyes. It's not physically there yet. There's nothing. It's part of a display. But when it comes to the AGI bot, I think before we understand the interactions between them, the first thing I want to do is to see what these human teams need from this AGI teammate before we even start to track their eyes. How does gaze sharing still work? How does, for example, us doing scan path similarity with the human teams, assessing those, but also what do they need out of this AI bot before we actually move forward into that? You never know. Maybe in a couple of years we're going to hear about an eye tracker for VR, maybe. But right now, what we're really more interested in, before we actually put the AI into the system and start to assess it with eye tracking and other stuff, even before we do that, what is needed? What does the team need from this? What's even going to look like to trust it? What's it going to give? This explainability, should it be verbal, or maybe they would be talking to explain? Right now, everything is visual. So even before integrating, what's that going to look like would be more important to assess before we assess their eyes, the virtual eyes.
That's great as a jumping off point to the second thing, because you talked about explainability, you talked about safety a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I know, right, in a job talk, right, we want to keep things clear, but I'm curious, how are you thinking about AI safety? How are you thinking about fairness? What do you think are kind of the frontiers, and how do you see that in your work?
Like the first thing that really comes to mind is that when it comes to explainability and other stuff is that how are they using it and how are they going to interact with it? Are they going to interact with it in a malicious way to start with? Are they going to use it in a way that they're going to be trusting it bluntly? Because the whole idea is that having safety in mind is when it comes to the safety of the performance in general, whether it's a UAV mission or a flight or a plane or whatever that is. But when it comes to having AI in terms of, safety, we want to make sure that it's assessed very early on by other people who want to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to do before we put it in a more complex system. But what it's needed to do, it's based on the teams. So, yeah, we have to make sure that basically want to understand how people are going to even disagree with it. If it's doing something that's going to be bad for safety, for example, what's that going to look like? How is it going to be updated? It's easy. We're not going to integrate it in a way that's going to be going out of the system. It's fairly complex. It's like a whole dissertation probably to look into that. But that's some starting points for that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes, actually.
Yeah. Really interesting. And a number of places you mentioned principles of human-human team relationships being applied maybe in the future. I wonder if you could give a particular example of a principle for human teaming that might be extended to human AI teaming.
Yeah. So, for example, I don't know, when you saw the Tesla's launch, people were talking with the bot, and they were asking to make them drinks, and they saw their ID. The AI bot saw the ID of another person, and even when they disagreed, they were like, oh, we have to see your ID before we... Like all those things, let's start with communication. What's that going to look like? Communication is inherently a human-human way to actually talk. I mean, like verbal communication. And now AI bots are actually able to talk. If we're going to look at the second part, the AGI, how is that going to look like? But also, another part would be that we don't know if it's going to be possible yet, which is something we want to explore, which is shared mental models, right? Like if I'm doing something and my teammate's doing something and we have some shared idea and we have shared awareness, are they aware of what's going on, or are they just programmed to do these things? What happens when we don't have the same agreement on the same thing? What happens in new situations, different workloads? So awareness and shared mental models, I don't think can be transferred just yet, but that's why we need this research to try to understand what's needed and what's not, what's to be trusted and what's not.
So maybe a follow-up on that. Can you anticipate a principle of human AI teaming that is new and novel and specific to the human or the AI teammate to the human versus the human teammate?
Yeah. So I do really think that we need to address this problem of the going back and forth between the human and the AI. Like when the human disagrees, for example, should we have some guidelines for that, or should they always agree? Are they always going to be doing some things together? So nothing on top of my head that comes right around when it comes to stuff like specifically for the AI or for the teammate, for the human, but we need to make sure specifically when it comes to disagreements, something needs to come up. Like I feel like there's going to be a new terminology for this shared understanding, because as if right now, I don't think we can reach a point where there's complete shared understanding between humans and AI as a way to problem solve and think at the level that a UAV operator could do. But in the future, when we do, there's going to be probably a term for that, SAI, or like situation awareness for AI, something like that. Yeah. Other questions? No questions? Thank you. Oh, yes, Dr. Lee. Yes, go ahead.
I've got another question.
Yeah.
Nobody has of this. You collected the gaze information
Mm-hmm.
between the two, and then you looked at sharing that and found differences in performance. But I'm curious if you looked at the patterns of the gaze information as a predictor of performance. Were there patterns of perseveration where people tunnel visioned in on one part of the display, neglected something else, leading to poor performance?
Yeah. So,
other words, did you create a regression model or a machine learning model that took the gaze as an input to predict performance?
yeah. So what we did right now was not for the gaze sharing study, but in all the previous studies we were doing, the thing that led to the gaze sharing was some of the first studies. But what we did there was they were doing these tasks under different workloads. So for example, a low workload would be monitoring 3 to 5, and high workload all 16. And within those different workload conditions, we were taking their eye gaze and their interaction between each other, and we were applying some scan path similarity comparisons. There's something called, for example, scan match or multi-match. But also we use something called multidimensional cross-recurrence analysis. So all those things are usually for time series, for statistics, but then an eye tracking data set is a time series. Like every 16 milliseconds, we're getting an input for an eye tracking data. So we put all of those in, and we realized that there are differences between those metrics that are developed. It assesses, if people are overlapping in the same time, how far away they should be for an optimal way of scanning. Should they scanning, one be broadly scanning, one should be broadly scanning or narrowly scanning? Should they be overlapping all the time? Should we not be overlapping all the time? And what we saw was we can use those models to predict performance because we can see that they don't need to be overlapping all the time, but also they can be away from the time all the time. So revisits to AOIs was very, very good to have. We didn't use those for AI models. That's why that's the first step. Now that we have all those metrics we developed from cross-recurrence and other places, those are going to feed into an assistive AI model to have an adaptive display. But now that we have those relationship between those performance metrics and those new cross-recurrence and scan path similarity metrics. But yes, short answer is we were able to find scan path similarity metrics that can tell you without interrupting the teammate what they're doing as a team, their scanning strategy, what workload they're under, and whether or not they're going to break down in the future. Great question. Other questions? All right. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. Was it good?
All right, you have your